Theme 60: The North American Black Novel, Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler. The English detective novel, P. D. James. Index: 1. Introduction. 2. Relation with other themes. 3. Current legislation. 4. Detective fiction and the black novel, historical background. 5. Dashiell Hammett, life, works and style. 6. Raymond Chandler, life, works and style. 7. P. D. James, life, works and style. 8. Conclusion applicable to language teaching. 9. Relevant bibliography. The theme I have chosen to write about is number 60, which deals with the black novel and detective story in English. In the first place, I will talk about the life, works and style of Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler, two of the most important American black novel writers. Following this, I will go on to write about the detective fiction of English writer P. D. James, before finishing with a conclusion related to some thoughts on how best to deal with these literary genres in our secondary school classes. This theme is related to others which deal with the historical background to this period, numbers 52 and 58, as well as others concerned with the literature of the time, such as number 55. The Modified Organic Law of Education, the LOMLOE, came into force in 2021 and has now been introduced in secondary education. The law deals comprehensively with the most suitable type of methodology to be implemented in our secondary school classes. The official curriculum of the Autonomous Community of Madrid contains detailed information about the introduction of cultural points related to history and literature during the different stages of compulsory secondary education and bachillerato. All of this is established and supported by the Council of Europe in the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. In the first place, I will talk briefly about detective fiction, a genre that has existed for a long time. The literature of crime was already popular in mid-Victorian Britain, and we also find it in Dickens's darker sides. But the most influential writers are probably Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, with his famous detectives Sherlock Holmes, and Edgar Allan Poe. It was Poe who first created the formula and structure of what was to become the typical detective story, and the first detective of renown in literature, Auguste Dupin. In traditional detective literature, what matters is the plot intrigue and finding out the mystery and the person who is guilty. We also have what is known as the black novel. Its main authors are American, and they were worried about the socio-political significance by giving the narration a realistic and bitter tone, and by using the criminal theme in order to build a critical testimony of their time. Classic detective fiction was having an outstanding worldwide success at the time when the American black novel originated. The most famous European investigators, from Poirot to Maigret, arose during the 20s and were a prelude to the appearance on the scene of Perry Mason and Nero Wolfe in the 30s. Around the 1920s, the interest of the North American public for this kind of literature had generated the popular magazine Black Mask, which originally only contained mystery narrations. Successive changes of proprietor and director led it to an assumption of raw and harsh language, reflecting the incidence of crime in social reality. The adjective black in the title of the magazine can be seen as an antecedent of the future denomination black novel. This new genre, which started in the form of stories and short novels, will not reveal itself as true fiction until 1929, when Little Caesar by William Burnett and Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett were edited in book form. Only then did it become apparent that these authors were dealing with a tragically real problem and adopting an unavoidable critical intention. I will now write about the first of the authors mentioned in the title of the theme. Dashiell Hammett was born in Maryland in 1894, of Scottish and French origin. Both his father and grandfather had been known as business failures, gamblers, heavy drinkers, and ambitious men, though inherently lazy. In his youth, he spent much of his time reading mysteries and adventure novels from the local library. He had to leave the Baltimore Polytechnic at the age of 13 to help his father with his latest business failure. He had a series of really unsatisfactory jobs on the railroads, as a stockbroker and machine manufacturers, and so on, from which he was usually fired. Hammett became an employee of Pinkerton's National Detective Agency in 1915. After serving in the U.S. Army for a year during World War I in the Motor Ambulance Company, he had to be discharged because he came down with tuberculosis after flu. In hospital, he met Josephine Dolan, a nurse he would marry in 1921. Although he rejoined Pinkertons, he had to leave finally due to medical reasons and perhaps because of the reputations of brutality the agency had acquired for its methods. More important, however, was his burning desire to write. After he left Pinkerton's, he enrolled in stenography and writing courses in San Francisco, training himself for journalism. His start was a 100-word anecdote, "The Parthian Shot". Then he became interested in writing and advertising and entered the pulp story market. His first appearance in Black Mask came with The Road Home. Even though he was having considerable success placing his stories, he was not earning much, and he abandoned fiction writing in 1926 for a job as an advertising manager, which gave him financial security for his family. However, his personal life changed. He gambled, drank heavily, and had a series of affairs, turning to writing for health reasons. Soon afterwards his marriage ended. He published book reviews, articles, and poems in addition to his fiction, earning much more than before. His career was clearly on the rise. In 1930 he met Lillian Hellman in Hollywood, where he had gone to work, and started a tempestuous relationship with her that lasted to the end of his life. He probably joined the Communist Party in the 1930s and went to jail in 1951 for refusing to reveal the names of the contributors to the bail bond fund of the Civil Congress. His connection with Hollywood lasted until the mid-1950s. He died in 1961. Hammett published over 60 stories, many in the Black Mask, as well as his main or more important novels. His habitual character, the Continental O.P., has a kind of impersonality tinged by a lack of scruples in the practice of his profession. In Red Harvest, he faces political corruption, and in The Dane Curse, he has to struggle against a decadent aristocracy mined by greed and drugs. Both novels were first published in installments in Black Mask, and marked the arrival of critical realism to detective fiction. Even more anti-hero is Sam Spade, the private detective in The Maltese Falcon, a book now famous for the Hollywood film with Humphrey Bogart as the main character. Spade deploys an absolute cynicism in order to survive and for his own benefit, without respect for any moral code except his own. It is written in the third person, the narrator standing outside the character, like a camera watching an actor, as a neutral technique. The same happens in what is considered his best novel by critics, The Glass Key. Once more, this is set in a political context, but with a more complex psychological ambiguity, and it represents a sordid and cruel fight for electoral triumph between high and low classes. The second American black novel writer I will talk about is Raymond Chandler, who was born in Chicago in 1888. His father became a drunk and disappeared, leaving his family without support, for which Chandler would never forgive him. He and his mother had to travel to London to be looked after by relatives. Chandler entered Dulwich College, a public school, where his formal education, steeped in the classics, was superb. It provided him with a certain amount of self-confidence in the manipulation of language, but the knowledge that he would not be allowed to go to university increased his sense of humiliation and injustice. Perhaps out of revenge, he resigned from the civil service, where he was placed third in a class of 600. In 1912, when he was 23 and having by then proved himself a failed poet, journalist and expatriate, he borrowed £500 and joined the Canadian Army to fight in the First World War in France, living through brutal experiences. On his return to Los Angeles, he fell in love with Cissy Pascal, the wife of a friend, and married her after his mother's death, because she disapproved of the marriage due to the difference of ages. He became vice president of a small oil company until he turned to adultery and heavy drinking, losing his job. The urge to write was filled, ironically, for a man steeped in the classics, by the discovery of pulp fiction, which led him to a striking change of style. After years of laboring, he published a combination of some of his stories in one book, his first novel, The Big Sleep. He wrote some novels, and in 1943 he was summoned to Hollywood to write film scripts. Chandler was, without doubt, the best black novel classic writer during the Second World War and post-war period. Farewell, My Lovely has for its theme the hatred of the rich and the influence they have on the police for their own benefit and privileges. The High Window deals with the desire of the rich to control everything. The Lady in the Lake is a better balanced and more subtle work. This time the theme is corruption in the police. In the 1950s, he wrote The Long Goodbye, in which, to prove that detective fiction could be considered or called literature, he decided to alter the form and bring it closer to the serious novel, deepening the relationship between his hero and some of the major characters. Chandler's awareness of the dynamics of style, his playful approach to language, and his desire to push the formula to the limits of its capacity resulted in a style of great sophistication and flexibility, especially in his early books. By using elements of the objective technique, he enhanced the impact of the colloquial style. His use of short, stripped-down sentences maintains the clipped rush tempo of an exciting incident being retold. Poetic descriptions, the use of hyperbole and wisecracks are the main features of his style and which best convey his particular blend of humor, cynicism, and sentimentality. In Philip Marlowe, he created a new private detective, combining a constant irony and sarcasm with a highly ethical personality. Marlowe is a hero, physically and emotionally tough and capable of balancing sentimental romanticism with cynicism. Chandler created a hero who would never be spoiled by success, whose only satisfaction is that of a job well done in a society unworthy of his services. For the final part of my theme, I will lead with P.D. James, a highly regarded English writer of detective stories. Born in 1920, she held various positions in hospital administration and later joined the Home Office Criminal Police Department. She died in 2014, just after publishing her last novel, Death Comes to Pemberley. Her novels follow the typical pattern of detective stories. There is generally a violent death, a limited circle of suspects, and the gradual elimination of these suspects eventually leads to the discovery of the murderer. P.D. James introduces some variations in her works, such as the presence of a serious detective. She tends to use closed settings, such as large houses or hospitals, as in Cover Her Face, An Unsuitable Job for a Woman, A Mind to Murder, or A Shroud for a Nightingale. These restricted settings and sets of characters allow James an intriguing puzzle element and provide a closed world for pettiness, jealousy, and crushed ambitions in novel after novel. She also deals with persistent topics. Perhaps due to her hospital background, she often introduces incurable illnesses in her books, as we come across in The Black Tower. In other novels, such as Death of an Expert Witness, she deals with strong themes like incest. The narrative stance, the commentary, and the attitude towards life expressed in the style is even more important than the puzzle. That conservative tone, similar to Dorothy Sayers or Agatha Christie, in contrast to that of the crime novel, which is so often left-wing or radical, accounts for much of the appeal of her novels. However, there are certain defects and difficulties. Often there are too many characters and Mrs. James simply lacks skill in introducing them, so that the reader has difficulty in sorting them out at first. Too many of the novels are constructed on a pattern of interviews, while another defect is that some of the books are simply not revised carefully enough. To conclude, I would say that both these genres, the black novel and the detective story, provide us with a wealth of authentic material. Current legislation highlights the importance of encouraging students to read, and it would be an excellent idea to use some of the novels, either abridged versions or extracts, in our lessons. In addition, the vast number of literary productions from these two genres that have since been made into television series or films would also give us a great deal of suitable material to use in class. The bibliography I have used for the information in this theme has basically been A Critical History of English Literature by David Dakes, the Norton Anthology of English Literature, and the Norton Anthology of American Literature by various authors. I hope you agree with me that my theme has covered all the necessary points and that it has demonstrated the importance of dealing with these important literary genres in the English language, using up-to-date methodological principles, something which can only be of benefit to our students.